It begins not in the comfort of shadow, but in its absence. The Egyptian sun, already fierce by the first breath of morning, rises without hesitation, spilling across the land as though it intends to strip the earth bare. The sand does not soften underfoot. It reflects the light back upward, doubling the heat, burning the soles of even the most calloused feet. The mud brick homes, though cool from the night, quickly surrenders to the blaze, their walls heating like clay pots left in the kiln. By midday, there is no escape, for shade is a luxury granted only by the river reeds or the fleeting shadows of passing cloud. And yet, the people endure. They do not scatter from the sun. They weave their lives within it. They move slowly, deliberately, their bodies wrapped not for warmth, but for breath. They dig into the ground as though the earth itself holds the secret of coolness. They measure their hours by the patience of trees, by the rhythms of their lungs, by the mercy of dusk when the light finally withdraws. There is no panic here. There is no panic here. No frantic search for shelter that does not exist. Instead, there is discipline, ritual, knowledge passed through the generations like water poured from one clay jar to another. To live in Egypt is to live with the sun as both destroyer and sustainer, to make peace with the heat that never loosens its grip. Each coping method is not mere survival, but a philosophy that the body, the earth, and the sky can all be persuaded to yield if approached with respect. This is not the story of shade sought and found. It is the story of shade imagined, of strategies carved from linen, clay, roots, breath, and time. The Egyptians did not wait for coolness. They created it when none was offered. The first defense was always the body itself. Egyptians understood the paradox of cloth. It was not a burden but a shield. Linen, spun from flax along the Nile's edges, was light, porous, and alive with air. It was not worn tight, never cinched to cling against the sweat. It was allowed to flow. The heat, relentless as it was, could not cling when the body was draped loosely. At dawn, men wrapped themselves in tunics cut wide, the fabric brushing their limbs like moving water. Women pulled long veils over their hair, not bound against their faces, but hanging with space enough for air to pass. Even children, restless and quick, learned the art of oversized garments, their sleeves fluttering as they ran, transforming their bodies into sails for every passing breeze. To the outsider, it may have looked careless. To the Egyptians, it was calculation. The linen carried memory. Before it was cloth, it was green soaked with Nile water. After weeks of drying, beating, and weaving, it still held that history, a whisper of coolness in its thread. When wrapped around the body, it seemed to remember the river. The people too remembered, trusting the cloth to protect not by blocking the sun, but by letting the air dance between skin and fabric. Priests dressed this way in temples, soldiers wrapped their heads in the desert, and farmers bent over fields with tunics swinging free. To bind cloth too tightly was to invite suffocation. To leave it loose was to invite life. The wrapping of the body was not vanity, it was survival. And when the wind moved through the folds, it carried with it a message as clear as scripture. Endure, endure, endure. Even the animals had their ways. Donkeys and oxen were draped in simple cloths, soaked briefly in water. Their hides cooled by evaporation as they plodded beneath the sun. Linen was the common ally, for beast and human alike. The ground itself offered its quiet mercy. Beneath the baked crust of sand and stone lay a coolness that never showed its face but could be coaxed into service. Egyptians learned to dig, sometimes just shallow pits, sometimes deep jars lowered into the earth, where the heat could not follow. Water stored in clay jars was never left above ground to bake. Instead, it was buried, the vessel half swallowed by soil, where the earth's breath kept it cooler than the air. To drink from such a jar was to taste relief. The liquid not icy, but firm, steady, and heated. Families placed their most precious jars near thresholds or in courtyards, shaded by mats, the clay sweating moisture that cooled it further. When the heat pressed hardest, the people themselves turned to clay. Children dug shallow hollows in the sand, lying belly down against the earth, whispering that the soil beneath still remembered night. Farmers cooled their hands by burying them briefly in damp ground at the edge of irrigation ditches. Potters knew it best of all. Their workshops, rich with moist earth, were sanctuaries of coolness. It was a medium that taught the lesson: dig deep enough, and the heat loosens its grip. In homes, floors were often clay, not stone. At midday, children sprawled on them, cheek pressed to the earth that still felt cool even as walls burned. Mothers spread dampened mats over these floors, creating a tiny island of relief where babies could rest. Even the animals had their ways. Dogs dug shallow pits in the shaded courtyards, curling into the earth's cool embrace. Oxen pressed their flanks against damp canal banks. The lesson was the same for all. The surface burns, but the depth protects. Egyptians did not wait for shade. They carved it from the ground itself. Each jar buried, each hand cooled in clay, was an act of faith that the earth beneath the sun still belonged to them. Shade was rare, but it was not absent. Stubborn as the people themselves, endured where others withered. Sycamore, acacia, date palm, these became not only landmarks but lifelines. Their roots reached where human hands could not. Drinking deep reserve was hidden beneath the desert's mask. To rest beneath a sycamore was to feel the first true mercy of the day. Its branches stretched wide, casting a green shadow heavy enough to sit in. Farmers broke bread in those patches. Children played. Women ground grain with rhythms softened by filtered light. These trees were not simply background, they were shrines of survival. Their presence dictated where villages placed wells, where paths curved, where markets bloomed. The acacia offered less breath but equal strength. Its wood, hard and enduring, was prized, but so too was the narrow line of shaded cave. Shepherds leaned against its trunk at noon, goats huddling near its roots, all creatures equal beneath its bare generosity. The date palm gave both shadow and sustenance. Its crown of fronds fanned out against the glare, while its fruit provided energy to endure another march beneath the burning sky. Even in temples, trees were honored. Courtyards planted with sycamores became sacred spaces, their shade considered divine presence. To walk into such a court was to step into a pocket of another world, where sound softened and breath came easier. Even the animals had their ways. Birds nested in the palms, foxes lingered at their edges, cattle pressed their horns against trunks, all drawn to the cool that only trees could provide. The Egyptians learned to walk by their shade, Roads between settlements were often planned to pass by known groves. Caravans halted at oases where trees gathered, not only to rest, but to align themselves with ancient rooted wisdom. The desert cannot be defeated, but it can be survived with patience. These trees were not accidents, they were companions. To see one against the horizon was to see the promise that the day's heat could be endured. Survival was not only external, it was within the body itself. Egyptians mastered the art of breath, a rhythm that slowed the heart and cooled the spirit when the air itself seemed to burn. To gasp was to waste, to breathe slowly was to endure. In the fields, men bent over their labor, not with hurried panting, but with measured instinct. Men bent over their labor, not with hurried but Men bent over their labor, not with hurried panting, but with measured inhales, each breath a discipline. They exhaled through parted lips, letting heat escape like steam from a jar. Scribes sitting in courtyards wrote with patience, their breathing as steady as their brush strokes. Even soldiers marching learned to align steps with lungs, conserving energy against the heat's assault. Women teaching children urged them, breathe as the river flows, not as the storm strikes. Slow, deep breaths filled the belly, cooled the blood, calmed the head. It was not mystical alone, it was practical science born of survival. The less frantic the breath, the less the body consumed, and the longer one could work beneath the sky. At midday, elders rested in silence, their breaths nearly indistinguishable from sleep. They had learned that air itself, though hot, could still soothe if treated gently. To force it was to burn, to accept it was to cool. Even the animals had their ways. Camels kneeling at rest exhaled slowly, their sides rising and falling with the patience of sand dunes. Dogs panted, yes, but with rhythm, never wasting motion. The Egyptians observed, imitated, and refined. This was breath as rebellion, not against the sun, but against despair. It whispered, control what you can, surrender what you must. In the heat without shade, the body became its own oasis, lungs the hidden well. The greatest coping strategy was also the simplest, patience. Egyptians knew the sun ruled the day, but they also knew it did not rule forever. Dusk was coming, always. To wait for it was not laziness, it was wisdom. Work began before dawn and ended by noon, not because they were idle, but because they aligned themselves with the sky's mercy. Tasks requiring heavy labor, harvesting, hauling, building, were done in those first hours. By midday, life slowed. Villages grew quiet, courtyards filled with murmured stories, soft songs, the hum of weaving. The hours of the highest heat were endured with stillness, bodies conserving themselves until the sun bent westward. And then, the transformation. As the sky softened, as the light turned from white to gold, life resumed. Farmers returned to fields, fishermen cast nets. Children ran barefoot, laughing through alleys now cooled. The village breathed again. Dusk was not just a relief, it was a celebration. It was proof that the heat, no matter how merciless, always yielded. Festivals were often timed for evening. Weddings began at twilight. Processions moved beneath stars. Markets reawakened in the soft dark. Even worships shifted with the sun. Priests offering prayers at sunset to gods who carried them safely through another day. Even the animals had their ways. Owls stared, cattle lowed in relief, dogs stretched and rose from their day's stillness. All waited together for dusk, each creature carrying the knowledge that patience was survival. To endure the heat without shade was the trust in time itself. The sun was mighty, but the night was eternal. From wrapping of the body to waiting of dusk, this was the Egyptians' rhythm against the sun. They draped themselves loosely in linen, creating moving shade where none existed. They dug into the earth, finding clay and coolness where the surface only burned. They leaned into the rare mercy of trees, companions that endured as they did. They slowed their own lungs, making the body its own oasis. And finally, they waited, not with fear but with patience, for dusk's soft hand. The lamps grow dim, the jars are buried cool in the earth, the palm trees sway faintly in the night breeze. Breath comes easy now, slow and deep. The village sleeps beneath a sky jeweled with stars. The heat loosened, the silence completes, the rhythm is whole, and now you are at rest.